There are men who conduct music, and then there are men who command it. Men who can stare into the chaotic abyss of 100 different instruments, 100 different souls, and with a flick of the wrist, bend them into a single divine voice. Albert Finch was such a man. To the world, he was the maestro, a living legend whose name was whispered with the same reverence as Bernstein or Karajan. His concerts sold out in minutes. His recordings were definitive. He was a titan, a genius, a god of sound. But like many gods of myth, he was also a tyrant. He was notoriously difficult, viciously precise, and legendarily cruel. He didn't just demand perfection. He carved it out of the musicians before him, often leaving scars in the process. His personal life was a fortress, his emotions a locked room. The only thing he ever truly loved, the only thing he ever truly served, was the music. And it was in the heart of his temple, his personal, acoustically perfect music hall, that he was found. A king on a silent throne. The god of sound fell by silence. On the morning of October 12, 2023, Finch's long-suffering personal assistant, a young woman named Clara, let herself into his private sanctuary. She was delivering his morning tea, a ritual as precise as any metronome. Earl Grey, 2 lumps of sugar, a single slice of lemon. But the silence that greeted her was wrong. It wasn't the peaceful silence of contemplation. It was a heavy, dead-air silence, a silence with weight. And then she saw him. Albert Finch, a man of ferocious energy, was utterly still. He was seated in his favorite leather chair at the podium where he did his composing, slumped forward as if in a deep, final bow. There was no sign of struggle. The half-empty cup of tea from the night before was untouched beside him. The multi-million-dollar security system showed no unauthorized entry. The doors were locked from the inside. When Detective Isabella Rossi arrived, she felt like she'd walked into a vacuum. A 20-year veteran of the force, Rossi had seen the grotesque and the tragic. She was used to the loud, violent language of murder. A gunshot was a declaration. A knife wound was a scream. But this was a whisper, or less. Nothing. The first officers on the scene were baffled. The paramedics who declared him dead were equally perplexed. There were no marks on his body, no wounds, no bruises, no signs of asphyxiation. He looked peaceful, almost serene, as if he had simply stopped. The coroner's preliminary report only deepened the mystery. Finch, at 68, was in remarkable health. His heart was strong, his lungs clear. The initial toxicology screen came back completely clean. No poison in the tea, no drugs in his system. It was as if someone had found the master switch to his life and simply flipped it off. Detective Rossi surveyed the room. It was a monument to one man's ego and genius. Polished wood floors, walls lined with sound-dampening panels, a single grand piano gleaming in the corner, and in the center, the podium. On it, the only thing in the entire room that felt out of place. The only thing that screamed in the crushing silence. It was a musical score, but it was unlike anything Albert Finch had ever been known to compose. Finch's work was the epitome of control, of mathematical precision and soaring, structured beauty. This was chaos. A furious scrawl of notes climbing over each other like panic spiders. Dissonant chords were slashed onto the page. The tempo marking wasn't allegro or adagio. It was a single, desperate word scrawled in capital letters. Furia. It was the score for a symphony. An unfinished symphony. His last. Rossi, who knew more about ballistics reports than musical theory, couldn't make sense of it. But she knew, with the instinct that had kept her on the job for 2 decades, that this wasn't just a piece of music. It was the key. It was the motive, the weapon, and the confession, all rolled into one. She just didn't know how to read it. The media dubbed it the silent death of the maestro. The official cause of death was eventually, and unsatisfyingly, listed as a sudden, massive cardiac event. A fluke of nature. Case closed. But for Detective Rossi, the case was anything but. How can a perfectly healthy man be frightened to death in a locked room? Who was the phantom killer that left no trace? For weeks, she was haunted by the image of that frantic, angry music. The case sat on her desk, growing colder by the day, a silent monument to a perfect crime. Until, in an act of sheer desperation, she decided to do something no detective in her precinct had ever done before. She decided to consult a musicologist. Dr. Alastair Croft was, in many ways, the anti-Finch. Where Finch was a global celebrity, Croft was an academic recluse. Where Finch commanded orchestras, Croft deciphered the dead languages of medieval hymns. He was brilliant, eccentric, and had a well-documented academic disdain for Albert Finch, whom he considered a technically brilliant but emotionally barren populist. He was skeptical when Rossi laid the photocopied score on his desk. "Detective," he said, his voice dry as old parchment, "I fail to see what the scribblings of a dying megalomaniac have to do with police work." Finch's heart gave out. "It happens." "Humor me, doctor," Rossi replied, her voice tired. "You're the expert. Tell me what you see." Croft picked up the pages. At first, he scoffed. Amateurish, bombastic, a chaotic mess. But then he fell silent. He spread the pages across his desk. He hummed a few bars, his fingers tapping out a rhythm. The silence in the office stretched for a full 10 minutes. Detective Rossi watched, holding her breath. She saw a flicker in the academic's eyes, a spark of recognition, quickly followed by a shadow of something else. Disbelief, and maybe fear. "This isn't chaos," Croft finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "Dear God, this is a narrative." He explained that throughout history, some composers used musical cryptography to embed hidden messages in their work. Shostakovich, for example, famously used a motif based on his own initials. It was a composer's secret signature. Finch is doing something similar here, Croft explained, his finger tracing a sequence of notes. But he's not spelling out his own name. He's telling a story. Each movement, each phrase, it's a chapter. Croft began to dissect the symphony, and the first twist in the case unfurled, a twist that took them 30 years into the past. The first section of the music, Croft explained, was built around a specific 5-note theme. Using a German system of musical notation where letters correspond to notes, he began to spell it out. L-I-L. Lila, Rossi breathed, the name feeling alien on her tongue. Who's Lila? A deep dive into Finch's past was like excavating a buried city. He had taught at a prestigious music conservatory in his younger years, before his fame exploded. Rossi's team cross-referenced the name, Lila, with old student records and missing persons reports. And then, they found her. Lila Moreau, a cello prodigy. By all accounts, she was brilliant, passionate, destined for greatness. She was Albert Finch's star pupil, his protégé. And in the spring of 1993, at the age of 19, she vanished. Her cello was found in her dorm room. Her sheet music was left on its stand. She had simply walked out one evening and was never seen again. The police at the time had treated it as a runaway case. A troubled young artist overwhelmed by the pressure. The case went cold and was eventually forgotten by everyone. Everyone, it seemed, except Albert Finch. The symphony isn't just about her, Croft said, his eyes wide as he continued his analysis. It's a confession. The puzzle pieces began to slot together, forming a picture of terrifying clarity. The music was the roadmap to a decades-old crime. Croft explained the first movement, a slow, beautiful adagio. It's a duet, he said. The orchestra represents Finch, and this hauntingly beautiful solo line. It's a cello. It's Lila. The music was lyrical, almost a love song, but underneath, a discordant hum persisted. The sound of a lie. It was their time at the conservatory. The mentorship, the shared passion, the dark obsession that Finch developed for his student. Then came the second movement. The music shattered. It became a frantic, terrified chase. A scherzo of betrayal. Listen to this, Croft urged, humming the melody. The cello solo, Lila's theme. It's playing frantically, trying to escape. But the full orchestra, Finch, is hunting it down. The brass is violent. The percussion is brutal. It's an assault. In the score, the cello's musical line is abruptly cut off, silenced by a single, crushing chord from the entire orchestra. A C minor chord. The chord of tragedy. On the page, Finch had circled that single chord in red ink. It was the moment he had killed her. The star pupil who had likely rejected him, who had threatened to expose his obsession. The runaway who never ran away at all. This was the first jaw-dropping twist. The man they thought was the victim was, in fact, a murderer. Albert Finch had carried the secret of Lila Moreau's death for 30 years. The third movement was a largo, a funeral march. A long, agonizing expression of guilt. 30 years of it poured onto a page. It was mournful, beautiful, and utterly without redemption. "This is a man being eaten alive from the inside out," Croft said quietly. He lived a lie for 3 decades. Every award, every standing ovation, was built on the ghost of this girl. But that still didn't answer the question. If Finch was the killer, who had killed him? And why now, after 30 years of silence? The answer lay in the final, unfinished part of the symphony. The part marked Furia. The last few pages were a frantic mess, barely legible. The notes were all over the staff. "This isn't memory anymore," Croft declared, his voice trembling slightly. "This is happening in real time." He was writing this as he was dying. He's not confessing. He's describing. Rossi felt a chill crawl up her spine. Describing what? A sound, Croft said, pointing to a single, sustained note that was repeated over and over, circled furiously. A C-sharp, a very specific frequency. It's the open A string of a cello, but he's marked for it to be played with a specific, unnatural harmonic. It's a sound that would be piercing, unforgettable. It's the sound of a ghost. A sound. He wasn't attacked. He wasn't poisoned. He heard sound. Rossi's mind raced. It was the final, impossible piece of the puzzle. How do you kill a man with a single musical note? She returned to the crime scene photos, to the layout of the music hall. It was acoustically perfect, designed to carry the purest sound. Who would know that? Who would know about Lila? And who would have the patience to wait 30 years for revenge? Her team dug again. Not into students, but into the faculty, the staff, the forgotten names in the conservatory's archives. And there, they found him. A quiet, unassuming man named Arthur Finley. He had been the conservatory's luthier, the craftsman who makes and repairs stringed instruments. He had been there for 40 years. A ghost in the hallways, the man who cared for the instruments, including the cellos. When Rossi and her partner brought Arthur in for questioning, he was calm. An elderly man with gentle hands and eyes that held a sorrow as deep as the ocean. He didn't deny anything. He just told them the story. Arthur Finley was born Arthur Moreau. He was Lila's older brother. He told them that after Lila vanished, a part of him had died. He never believed she was a runaway. He suspected Finch, the possessive mentor, but he had no proof. So he had changed his name and taken a humble job at the conservatory, dedicating his life to one purpose, to watch Albert Finch. For 30 years, he watched him rise to fame, watched him collect accolades, all while knowing the man was a monster. His revenge was a symphony of its own, a masterpiece of patience and psychological torment. A month ago, clearing out his parents' attic, he had found it, Lila's childhood diary. In its final pages, she had written in terrified detail about Finch's escalating obsession and his violent temper. It was the proof he had waited for his entire life. But he knew that after 30 years, a court case was uncertain. He didn't want legal justice. He wanted poetic justice. He knew about Finch's private music hall. He knew about his late-night composition sessions. He knew Finch was a man haunted by his own perfect pitch, a man who would be uniquely sensitive to a sound that shouldn't exist. On the night of October 11th, Arthur had let himself into the hall. He didn't say a word. He just stood in the shadows at the back of the auditorium. Finch, lost in the throes of composing his frantic, guilt-ridden confession, didn't even notice him. Then, Arthur raised the bow, and he played a single, piercing note. That's C-sharp, the ghost note from the score. The sound of Lila's cello, an instrument that should have been silent for 3 decades, suddenly slicing through the air in that acoustically perfect room. For Albert Finch, a man who lived and breathed sound, it was not just a note. It was an accusation. It was the voice of the girl he had murdered, resurrected from the dead. It was the sound of his own guilt made real. He looked up, his face a mask of pure terror. He saw the cello. He saw the ghost he had tried to bury for 30 years. He clutched his chest, and his heart, the heart that had beaten in time with the world's greatest symphonies, simply stopped. The coroner's initial report was, in a strange way, correct. He had died of a massive cardiac event, Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome, but it wasn't brought on by grief or by disease. It was triggered by pure, unadulterated terror. He had been, quite literally, scared to death. Arthur Moreau served a reduced sentence for manslaughter, a legal system struggling to quantify a crime with no physical weapon. He had killed a man with a memory. He had murdered him with a melody. In the end, Albert Finch, the master of sound, was undone by it. His final symphony was not just a confession of the life he took, but a live broadcast of his own death. A coded message from a dead man, leading police not to his killer, but to his victim, and in doing so, revealing a story of justice delayed, but not denied. It leaves us with a haunting question. Can a sound carry a ghost? Can a simple melody become a murder weapon? In the silent, hallowed halls of the maestro's final sanctuary, the answer is a terrifying, resounding yes.